me at a commercial conference. What were they thinking? Anyway, we've slightly ignored the brief, which is kind of true to form, because the truth is that the commercial performance of Direct Line, the turnaround, the relaunch of the brand is incredibly well documented. This august organisation even gave us a Gold Effectiveness Award 2 years ago, and Mark, though he won't talk about this, I'm sure because he's far too modest, it was made Marketing Leader of the Year by Marketing Society 2 weeks ago. So if you really need to know the ins and outs of the Direct Line case study, the Fixer campaign, bringing back Harvey Keitel in his role as Winston Wolfe in Pulp Fiction, what seemed at the time an act of absolute clinical insanity. That's all there to read and understand and appreciate, perhaps. What we wanted to talk about is what are the conditions that exist within a good agency-client relationship that they're like the relationship behind the relationship. What are the building blocks that make for success beyond, yeah, it's a good strategic solution, it's a neat creative solution, we delivered it to market. So that's what we want to talk about, if that's okay. We've got 7 ingredients which we think are at the heart of why we've been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Real pleasure to be here and to share what went behind the scenes, in fact, of a great campaign, which has been very well trailed. So I guess it starts with something really obvious, that the best relationships are formed in a context where it really matters. I suppose, to be blunt about it, the really wonderful work that delivers remarkable results really only comes when there's something at stake that anybody really gives a crap about. And the baked bean company that goes to an agency and says, we've lost a couple of share points, I don't think really is going to cut it. It needs to really, really matter. And in the case of insurance, it does, but that had kind of been lost. Insurance really does matter. It kind of lubricates the wheels of society. If you had to buy a new car every time you crashed it, you wouldn't buy a car. If you had to build a new house every time it burnt down, you wouldn't buy a house. And if I told you that the biggest single claim that we had in recent times was £19.4 million for one car crash, you might say, wow, how's that? That was one 17-year-old who walked away from the accident themselves, but put their 3 best friends in wheelchairs for the rest of their lives. You realise that the sharp end of insurance is actually pretty sharp. The role of the client, in this case, us, was to convince the agency that this really mattered. And the point was, whilst insurance was founded in Mesopotamian times and in the 16th century normalised in the coffee houses of London, it had lost its way. It had lost the plot. It had lost its grounding insight that insurance is here to fix things, make things better when they're bad. So at the outset, to quote Kennedy, we don't do this because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. It really, really mattered. And that's what I think invoked the relationship which sparked the amazing work. And not to put too fine a point on it, we just IPO'd, we put the name above the door, the brand was declining at 16%, and fast forward a couple of years' time, once the work's really started to bite, we were into 31% growth in 16, double-digit growth since. And the context of this is about effectiveness. And that's why we won an IPA Gold. And so we do a lot of work in our boardroom around education, around effectiveness. But I have to keep reminding everybody, the single biggest thing that we did in terms of improving effectiveness was the creative work. We saw an increase in effectiveness quotes per pound of 56% instantly from the new work. But it only came because it really mattered. And the agency got that, and Richard got that personally, and then maybe he might share a story about how he got the context of insurance personally. It has to matter.
So, and of course, we're all professional problem solvers. We like being given great, important, juicy problems that really, really matter. So the starting point is this burning bridge. The direct insurance market was being taken to pieces by price comparison websites. And there's a real sense, I think, even in our community, that that's just something you had to get used to. That the future, the settled will of the market was that consumers would go through price comparison websites to procure their insurance needs, and there's nothing anybody could do about it. And Direct Line's repeated refusal to be on price comparison websites was in some way absolute commercial folly. And so when they came to us and said, I said to all the agencies, this is a image of revolution, in case you hadn't noticed, and they said, we want to stage the third revolution in insurance, not as a sort of rhetorical flourish, which you often get, but as a deep-seated and profound intent that they had revolutionized the insurance market in 1985 and cut out the middle man or woman. The price comparison websites had revolutionized the market a decade or two later by putting the middle man or woman back in. And what they wanted to do, what Direct Line wanted to do, was to launch a third revolution, to restore the very importance and essence and meaning of insurance to people's lives, so they didn't simply shop around on the basis of price and cover, that they would make a bigger decision about, frankly, when the shit hits the fan, will this product actually work for me? And to change the conversation in the market from the moment of purchase to the moment that you really, really need this thing to work. And that's an extraordinary ambition for an agency to be delivered in a chemistry meeting, in a client briefing. And that sort of sense on our part, I think, that these people were for real. You could look Mark in the eye and go, I think you mean this. I also think that you're going to do what it takes to get the job done. So many times, a client brief comes to you and they want to turn around the commercial performance of the organization, but there are so many limitations and things they are not prepared to do to get there that there's no real sense that they mean it. And we met that ambition, I believe, because we were itching at that point in our life to prove to the market that nothing's impossible wasn't itself a rhetorical flourish or a means by which clients could beat us up when it came to costs or timing, but it was a deep-seated and fundamental way we wanted to work. We wanted to take on challenges that other people thought were impossible, other people had given up on, and prove that with enough audacity, ambition, and endeavour, you could construct entirely new commercial futures for the organisations that we worked with. And it's that, shared ambition is such a glib phrase so often used in credentials presentations. But I think in this case there was a sort of a perfect meeting of a client with an enormous appetite to get something done, and an agency that really wanted to prove itself. I might talk at some point about Vietnam, but not yet, perhaps.
Okay, save that for the end. So yeah, the gift of an impossible challenge was critical. Just to put that into context, having said how important insurance is, 29% of people agree with the following statement. Bear in mind, in many surveys, people don't agree with stuff which makes them look stupid. 29% of people who have bought on a price comparison website go on to agree with the statement, I don't know what I bought. Okay, so let's just put that in context. The metaphor would be, I go and buy a new car, I know what I want, I agree the model, I agree the price, I pay the person, I get the key, I put the key in the engine, nothing happens. Ah, shit, I forgot to ask if it had an engine. That's the metaphor for insurance in terms of people literally not knowing what they're buying and not being there in a high-performance way at the point of need. It seems such a simple flip, but it was the insight that was hiding in plain sight for 2, if not 3 decades, and we rediscovered that insight together. An important part to this is about trust and really backing one another to do the things that are needed in the moments that matter. From my perspective, trust has 2 component parts. It's the intent of an individual or an organization or a body and the capability to deliver. I think the intent was unquestionable. We were locked in, we had the right terms, the right conversations, the right relationships and agreements. But this is about the capability side and a couple of stories about the reasons why it did happen and maybe nearly didn't happen. So the first is that we had to trust Saatchi's to get Harvey Keitel. That's no mean feat. And they said they could, and we said, great, we'll do it then. And there are lots of intricacies in this one, and there's stuff that I can't really share, but suffice it to say, there was a conversation between the agency, Quentin Tarantino, and Harvey Keitel at Cannes Film Festival, discussing the virtues of UK motor insurance advertising, which I think went something like, you're not going to prostitute my favourite film, expletive, responded to by, yeah, but in the end, we've worked together a lot, we're good mates, I really love the character and I want to do it. And the rest, in turn, is history. But we had to back Saatchi's that they could deliver it, because it just would not have been the same. Because whilst it's somewhat incongruous to have a gangster as a metaphor for your intent in the least trusted sector in the world, it kind of works. And so he was the daddy of fixers. There were no alternatives. And so we had to back Saatchi's. In return, Saatchi's had to back us to sell it in, which was no mean feat. I wasn't really right at the heart of the creative process personally, indeed. But I was part of how we made sure that this got through the internal organisation. And so I guess we'd already built some effectiveness credentials. So this work comes from the same people who are quite literate and commercial in their sort of commercial endeavours. But there are a couple of things which is probably worth spelling out. The first is that the CEO didn't like the work. He really didn't like the work. And he's talked publicly about not liking the work. Of course, he loves it now. But there were some really, really knotty conversations about whether or not we should do this. He's a bit old. Is it really campaignable? You know, what if? Et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a really big moment where basically I earned my crust, and I'll look back and think that's the bit where I helped to make it happen. After that, then there is, as you can imagine, lots of stakeholder involvement. Probably the thing to pull out, which was our tailwind in the process, was that at the final sell, it emerged that two of our non-execs were actually in the middle of the Breaking Bad cycle themselves personally. So put your hands up if you watch Breaking Bad. Yeah, lots of people. Put your hands up if you watched it within a month. So there's an argument that it's as addictive as the methamphetamine storyline. So it was a bit of a following wind that two of our non-execs were sort of in that flow. So they got the genre of gangster entertainment and therefore understood the context. But Saatchi's really had no idea about how we were going to manage that process, because it's very contextual. It's very much about individual stakeholder management. And lo and behold, both of those processes delivered the goods. But it was difficult to find that trust, because what if we go and sell it in and then we don't get Harvey Keitel? What if they scoop Harvey Keitel and then we don't go and make the work? So it's that symbiosis which was really critical.
Okay. So then in the heart and the heat of the relationship, this is Waldorf and Stettler from the Muppets, of course, and famously, they absolutely love something and then they absolutely hate it. And I think that's, when I talk about the idea of strong opinions lightly held, which is a fundamental principle of the way I think that we should engage with our clients, people often think, well, that's just typical, Adland lack of principles. Here are my principles. If you don't like them, I'll just get some more. But I think because people want strong opinions, strongly held. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're in the shit on Brexit. Strong opinions, lightly held, is the way forward. What I mean by that is we have a moral obligation to deliver to our clients the best possible brand advice without fear or favour, without being concerned about client stakeholders, without being concerned about an agency agenda, without being concerned about holding company agendas. Our job is to be there and to speak truth unto power, and it's so difficult to do that. But I find that if you approach those engagements, like saying across the table at the end of the pitch when we were asked, had we done any research? And of course, that's a stupid question from clients in pitches, because of course we've done some research, and of course we're not going to tell you that the research was terrible. We're going to tell you it was amazing. I talked to some people in Sidcup and they absolutely loved this. And increasingly, I think that the role of research in pitches is not to convince the client, it's to convince you. And the ability to sort of sit across the table. I didn't stand on the table. I might have. Sit across the table and go, I think literally I've been out there with this work, and every day that you are not on air with this work, you are harming the fortunes of your organisation. It was such an intense sense that what we'd got was magical, and our ability then just to fervently believe in that, but not be dicks about the whole thing. It's to hold those opinions. To hold those opinions lightly, and I think it's a brilliant way to negotiate through the ups and downs of client and agency relationships. To hold that intent, that positivity, that firmness, but also the lack of being a dick.
Important point. So, catalyst for change. So, this is a slightly nuanced one. I think if you really want great work and stemming from great relationships, you have to be open to the fact that it will change you. I think anybody going into a relationship of any description, as you look in the rearview mirror, you'll recognise it's changed you in some way. And Richard might say a few words about what that's meant for Saatchi's, but for Direct Line, it really, I suppose, we put the words on a piece of paper and we had the intent, but made us commit to something that could lead to something remarkable, but also was pretty scary. But embracing that has paid massive dividends in terms of changing the organization fundamentally. So yes, we've changed the brand, yes, we've changed the comms, but we've changed a lot more than that. So we had very, very low engagement scores, specifically in marketing, actually lowest in the company. And we'd really lost a lot of self-belief, a lot of self-doubt. Actually, I think I can say that in the wake of the movement away from RBS, it was quite a bruised organization. Lost a little bit of self-conviction. And so the advent of the Winston Wolfe campaign gave us the perfect opportunity, and working with Saatchi's on how do we wrap this up for our staff, for ourselves, to drive our self-belief. And we worked together on an employee manual around fixing. And it wasn't vast, it was 2 words. It said, on it. Which, if you think about somebody you know who you think they're on it, they get shit done, don't they? I mean, somebody who's on it doesn't let you down, they show up, they know what's required in the situation. So we then flip that into a rallying cry. If you walk around our contact centres, you'll see WWWWD. What would Winston Wolfe do? And then we've got some remarkable stories of how we've gone way above and beyond what's really required to help customers, because the person in our contact centre or on our Twitter handle knew what it meant to be a fixer. In reality, they were perhaps only doing things that they were doing on the Friday, now on a Monday, but recognising its significance and importance. They'd maybe rediscovered the pride in what they do day in, day out. But let me tell you one little story. I've told it a few times, so some of you might have heard of it. But back in 2015, it just so happened that somebody was burgled in Doncaster, had their TV stolen, which was a bit of a bummer for them because it was stolen on the Monday, and on the Friday they planned to have their mates round to watch a big boxing fight. So on the Friday, they tweet us saying, I'm a bit hacked off, really, because I wanted my TV to watch the boxing fight with my mates. Coincidentally, fortunately, our Twitter handle is also handled out of Doncaster. And to cut a very long story short, our colleague on the Twitter handle logged off, drove home, picked up their TV, drove it to the customer's house so the customer could watch the boxing fight. I'm not going to lie, afterwards the risk police said, did we electrically test that TV? Not good to kill a customer. But in the end, that person knew what it meant to be on it and knew what it meant when, in answer to the question of what would Winston Wolfe do. So it changed us. And now we have seen massive increases in employee engagement, the renaissance of marketing within the company, a belief in brands. Still, the work is never done, but it has fundamentally changed us.
I think it's important, great client agency relationships change agencies, and of course, I've learned, I'm become passionate about the world of insurance. I didn't imagine I'd be 4 years ago. We've learned a huge amount of the capabilities that are required to deliver for a client like Direct Line Group. We've also learned that Harvey Keitel needs his meals sent to the chute from Claridge's. We've learned a huge amount, but I think we've learned a lot about ourselves, and I now have a conviction that when you join our agency, you shouldn't really be allowed to do anything for any clients until you've understood this case study, because for us, this is proof that you can take on impossible challenges, deliver impossible outcomes, and you can make a difference by simply refusing to accept the defeat that often the people around you and your competitors are doing. It's a really important touchstone for us, this campaign, in understanding who we are. And I think every agency tends to have that one piece of work we go, that is us, that is what we do. It is also the case, Mark's talked a little bit about the idea of contagious confidence. I used to think I was a young and naive and an account handler, the reason there was good and bad work in the world was because there were good and bad clients and good and bad agencies, and increasingly, and that, which is slightly insulting and almost entirely incorrect, increasingly I think there are just confident agencies and confident clients and agencies that lack confidence so often. Actually what we're doing, yes, we are selling, Ogilvy said, we sell or else, but we're also providing a sort of engine or a dynamo for confidence within organizations, often leading out ahead of what that organization thinks is possible or acceptable or right for them. And I learned that when we did Liverpool Street Dance for T-Mobile, and suddenly T-Mobile started going, oh, fucking hell, we did that. And that just built and built and built into a client organisation that felt they could take on anything. And I've seen that take place within DLG. When we met them, we kind of said, you've lost your mojo. I remember walking around Bromley, and there were all these beautiful cutouts of British Bulldogs. Yes, and little paw prints. And there was nothing from Direct Line. It was like that brand had lost its confidence and lost its mojo. And when we first presented the work to the broader marketing team after the pitch, we finished, there was a stunned silence, which I naturally assumed was because of the breathtaking performance that I just delivered. And eventually, I think Mark encouraged some conversation and comment. And as I remember it, somebody simply said, "This is great, but I just don't know whether we can pull this off." And that's what I think. So often what we do is to take an organisation, a group of people, a marketing community and a broader community on a journey, so that now this brand does things like this is Fleet Lights. So it's taking Direct Line's fixer approach to problem solving and trying to solve. Initially, we were solving the problem of how come streetlights light streets and not people or vehicles, and they're never where you need them to be, i.e. in rural areas or where the emergency services are attending to a particular problem. We've now made that technology open API, and it's on a trial with the lifeboat service because clearly there aren't streetlights at sea. It's that I can't imagine the organisation having even contemplated that sort of activity. And not that it is directly commercially delivering for Direct Line Group, but as Mark says, it presents a vision to the market, but also to the community of Direct Line Group, of a vision of the company that they want to be. And it's that contagious confidence that's so powerful and important.
Actually, just go back one, Richard, just to say this is we haven't covered explicitly, but the challenge, the continued challenge led us to some really unconventional things. So Fleet Lights was one. This is swarms of flying drones lighting the roads. And then we've subsequently done something called the Smart Crossing, which is hacking the road, a responsive, adaptive, LED-based road. You wouldn't know it because it's not reported, but every 2 hours, globally every 2 hours, a full 747 crashes and everybody's killed, or the equivalent of on our roads. So how do we hack some of these bigger problems is the space that we've got to. But what's really interesting about Fleet Lights, in its first incarnation, we have a sort of like an internal chat thing, and there were a few people who went rogue and broadly said, here we go, marketing pissing money up the wall, brackets again. When are we going to commercialize this thing? And my answer was, I don't know. But I think that's okay, because even if it takes 3 or 4 years, we've learned a lot, and it is, as Richard very eloquently said, a vision of the company that we know we need to become. But the really interesting thing is then 6 months later, Keister Lifeguards came to us and said, we think this could help save lives faster at sea. We piloted it, it's now in operation, it is saving lives. They find people 5 times faster, broader scan of choppy waters. And then the UN rang us, and they said, well, we think some of your technologies could help us with our sustainable development goals. Okay, well, let's see where this conversation goes. But that stemmed from a challenge of think about how you can take your core idea and fix some bigger things in the world. And it does entirely come from confidence. And the second time round, the internal reaction to the Smart Crossing was, yeah, we get it. Okay, final point. Never believe the hype. So for all the lovely sentiment that this story generates, the economics are pretty wonderful as well. So this was a brand which was in double-digit decline. And now, because we've really hit the category insight head-on, we're in double-digit growth. And the value of a Direct Line customer is a significant quantum above the value of a price comparison website customer. It's sort of always be that way. People who get insurance pay a little bit more, but they stay longer because they like it. They upsell, cross-sell a little bit more, maybe have a few less accidents. It's all stuff at the margin. It means that there are multiple more valuable to an insurance company. We've got the good ones. And yet, with our model, our acquisition model and retention model, it's cheaper to acquire a Direct Line customer than it is the commission you pay on a price comparison website. So when the analysts value our company, they look at how the hell are you getting these good customers so cheaply? And it, of course, is because of the power of the brand, the power of the communication, hitting the category insight head on. So, the last point is, though, nothing stays still forever. And I guess we're haunted as an organisation by those bruising years. So whilst it is really good now, it wasn't always. And there's absolutely no guarantee that it will necessarily always be that way. So we choose proactively to not drink from the Kool-Aid and be ever mindful of killing the golden goose, lest we get carried away. And I tend to borrow from a sports metaphor. And actually, sorry to entertain those who don't like cricket with a cricket story, but this is a true story, which is that England were bobbling around at 4th or 5th in the world. They got to number 1 in the world through completely changing their approach. They decided, rather than everyone being excellent at everything, we just need to find out what's the one thing that every individual is best in the world at. They got to number 1 in all 3 formats. And then one Wednesday afternoon, Jimmy Anderson turned up in the wrong T-shirt. Is that a big thing? He'd just taken 5 wickets the day before, and then the next match he went on to take 5 wickets again. But the sports psychologist I spoke to at the time said that was when it started. That was the moment. Because there's this phenomenon that performance can actually continue to increase, not just stay brilliant, but continue to increase, even though the cracks have started to form. It's just invisible, because they're cloaked by improving performance. And so for us, this is why it's so important to have a bit of rub in the relationship, so that we don't just get carried away. Because it would be so easy to go away with the fairies in 3 years' time. Richard and I wouldn't be invited back, because it would be that starburst, rather than something as enduring and significant. So don't believe the hype, don't drink from the Kool-Aid. And I'm told not to say paranoid, so it's somewhere between paranoid and alert. Yeah, but stay reasonably paranoid about killing the golden goose. So there's the 7 things. Hopefully there's something generalizable for everybody and anybody in this room, and I think we have a few moments to take some questions on broadly anything. You might want to know about Richard's Vietnam experience. There you go.